6 episodes, over 6 hours, but we finished. We reached the end. Queen P.R, Brian H. Waters, how you feeling? We just watched all this stuff about Vince McMahon, and I'm gonna give you your flowers. You know, sorry I don't have the literal ones, but I got you. A lot of stuff you already knew, I already knew. I mean, we as historians of this game. But how you feeling?
I feel good hearing it from Mr. McMahon himself. He finally was able to tell his own story in his own words. Netflix announced this documentary back in 2021, I think 2020.
Yes.
And Vince McMahon sat down for interviews in 2021 as well as his family, Linda McMahon, Stephanie McMahon, Shane McMahon, Triple H, Hulk Hogan, Undertaker, Bruce Pritchard, executives from USA Network, people we have never heard from before, people we have heard from, but there is a little bit more in some of these stories about Vince McMahon that we've heard and read about, but Vince gives a little bit more from his perspective, and we really get to understand who he is. And I will note that he says that he doesn't even know who he is or how to even answer that question, which is absolutely fascinating to me. They don't shy away from his controversies. They go into the lawsuit with Janelle Grant. They get into all of the scandals that have followed Vince McMahon's illustrious career in this business.
Even ones he didn't remember.
Right. He was like, that Sable lawsuit? What was that? I don't remember that. Which I don't know is sure not true. That is the one other very interesting aspect to this docuseries from Netflix. And Vince McMahon also released a statement about the narrative, which we'll get into, because we are reviewing all 6 episodes, giving our 5 biggest takeaways. But we do get to see how much of the lines are blurred between his Mr. McMahon character and who he is.
Yes.
You know, there's always that air of we don't know if it's 100% what it is. And that's kind of what the wrestling business is. We'll get into the end of kayfabe. We'll get into the portrayal of women on television. Like, we are going to get into all 6 episodes, and we want to know what you all thought of it in the comments. But first, Brian,
talk to me.
For someone who has never heard of Vince McMahon, how would you describe him to them?
Whoa, I would say Vince McMahon is a person who loves wrestling, his business, a professional wrestling, more than anything, and is willing to do anything it takes to not only put money in his pocket, but to skyrocket the popularity. I think we always think about the money, but a lot of times it's obviously it correlates, but that pop, that reaction, you kissed your on-screen mistress in front of your real life wife, only to let your wife kick you in the balls in front of 67,000 plus people just so that you could get a pop. Oh, I should say she could get a pop.
Vince lives for the pop.
Yeah, so that's the way I would describe Vince McMahon, somebody who is willing to go as far as possible to prove how much they love the business and to get that pop.
Yes. I think I would describe Vince McMahon as a mad genius with a tenacity for this business and who lives for the pop and is unapologetic about that. And there's a part where his on-screen character is yelling in, I think, Shane McMahon's face about how he is, I think, addicted to life and wants the zest for life or something of that nature. And I 100% think that was who Vince is, and he was speaking from who he is. And that is how I think Cornette or someone uh, pens him the PT Barnum of professional wrestling, and I 100% agree with that. Um, so I was excited, obviously, for this documentary. I was excited to review it with you, Brian H. Waters. So all
Same.
6 episodes dropped, and each episode has a title, which always
Yes.
intrigues me because it
Yes.
really just adds another aspect of the narrative for this documentary. So the first episode was called Junior, which is interesting because we chatted offline about Vince's feeling towards being a junior.
Mm-hmm. And we all know that he never likes that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not at all. Don't, because he's not a junior. When you really look at the way his name, it's Vincent James McMahon. That's the father. Vincent Kennedy McMahon. That's the son. You know, Jesse McMahon, the promoter, who they didn't talk about. Or maybe it was a quick mention now I think about it. But he was I guess but he was into boxing, but still combat sports.
It's still promoting, right?
Promoting, yeah. So we always heard about this, you know, the 3rd generation promoter. But yeah, him being called, like the title being called Junior, that's what he's probably mad about when you think about it.
He said, "Oh, this what we doing now?"
He probably like, look, the lawsuit, all that stuff there.
Yeah,
y'all
no,
call it Junior?
Really now? It is a perfect title, though, to be completely honest with you, because a big part of it is his relationship with his father and his relationship with Vincent
James
McMahon.
McMahon, yeah.
Is pivotal to the landscape and the future and the journey that professional wrestling goes on. Is Vince trying to prove himself to his dad and try to revolutionize the business that his father was in. So let's talk about some of the biggest takeaways that we took from episode 1 in the docuseries. And that first takeaway is Vince's relationship with his father.
Right.
We are familiar with a lot of what was talked about because we read a couple books about Vince, the Playboy magazine interview, and just little tidbits here or there that other people that
him
are
on Howard Stern
have shared. Yes. Him on Howard Stern sharing way too much information. But hearing it from him and how he didn't meet his dad till he was 12 or knew that McMahon was his last name, and never talking about why him and his father never talked about why his father wasn't there for his formative years.
Which is very interesting.
Very interesting. And then meeting him as a businessman, as this, you know, larger than life personality within the world of wrestling, and Vince instantly wanting to be a part of the business and to prove himself to his father. Like, that is really, I feel, where Vince's life kind of started, is him finding that purpose. But was there anything about how he talked about his relationship with his dad that surprised you?
Not as much. I think like the adulation and receiving the pat on the back that as young men we all look from our dads, right? Him getting that late and him being told I love you, you know, that was sort of like, oh, it happened then. Because like I read in Hogan's book, and Hogan like briefly describes, like he said one day he saw Vince McMahon Sr., you know, using the restroom and it was blood. And next thing you know, he was like, man, not only is Vince trying to start this business and really get it going, but he's also dealing with his father dying. You know, he died from a pancreatic cancer. So, you know, with that, and it tied something back to, you remember the History of WrestleMania DVD when they talked about WrestleMania 1, and Vince sheds a tear in that. And he said, all I could do was think about my dad when he stood in the ring. And I was like, oh, it makes sense because you didn't get all that. And this was the solidification of everything you're doing, because he said, like, Vinny said, you know what, Vinny? And it felt good to hear him say that, because I heard this in a book where he talked about, fuck those guys, you know?
Right.
Because we always hear he was always against it. He's like, my dad wouldn't have sold the company. It's like Cody says about Dusty. You know, Dusty would have told him he was crazy for All In.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Uh, that leads us to our second biggest takeaway was
Mm-hmm.
the business, and him wanting his dad to sell to him and his ideas for it. And we all know what he ended up doing, revolutionizing by going into the territories and really not giving a fuck.
Right.
He didn't care that these men were threatening his life. He didn't care that his father didn't like what he was doing. He wanted to succeed in this business. He knew what was next. He took a lot of risks and he just did what he felt was good for the business, period.
Yeah, and we benefited from it. Like I said, we're sitting right here. As much as, I will never discredit anybody for having their feelings the way they do. But I will also say, respect what I say, that we would not be sitting here if it wasn't for Vince McMahon. You can make, as crazy as this sounds, sort of make the argument about Hulk Hogan. I know they went hand in hand. I do think, if anything, this taught me was, as aggressive as Vince was, he would have found somebody in that spot. Not going to say they would have had the same commercial success. We all know he wanted it to be Dusty Rhodes. I've even heard from my uncle, Kerry Von Erich was somebody who was a consideration. But you had to have a Vince. You can't, we would not be here at all. Some people try the way the business is. So that was, definitely like one of my biggest takeaways was just as far as him in the whole business in itself.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And another big takeaway for me was once he did assemble all of these big stars and created the engine that just fucking kept going and revving and revving and revving and revving and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, connecting with the pop culture and the mainstream entertainment at the time, and him doing literally everything that he could to put that product in front of the world in different ways, in different forms of entertainment. That was one of the things that always impressed me about Vince McMahon, was the fact that he was always thinking forward and thinking ahead. There was one part where they talk about Vince finally taking a vacation, sort of after things really was like revving up and they were making all this money and putting the wrestlers through this insane work schedule to make all this money. And they go on vacation. And while they're on vacation, he comes up with the idea for WrestleMania 1. Like the idea, the concept of WrestleMania. And Linda, who I enjoyed in this documentary, is like, okay, so clearly you weren't relaxing. Clearly we were not on vacation. You were still working and thinking about the business. But then we got the spectacle that is WrestleMania, which was Vince having the forethought of, let's work with celebrities. Let's capitalize on Hulk being a celebrity. Bigger than the wrestling business at that time. Like, let's push it to the biggest heights that it can go. And at that time, it probably felt like impossible. Like, a lot of people doubted what he can do, and he ended up doing it. And it's a story that even when his kids talk about it, especially Stephanie, when she talks about everything that their family put on the line and sacrificed, they did it. It was a success.
You said it best.
She's very proud of that.
You said it best at the beginning, mad genius, and yeah, it's that's the best way to explain it. We go right into the third one because you did a great job with everything.
Our third takeaway.
Oh yeah, I love this one.
Protecting the business. Now, this is something that we even find ourselves doing in 2024. We still deal with people calling it fake, or that make believe thing, or they pretend fight,
or wrestling shit.
Yes, exactly. But at that time, it was very important to protect the business. And Hulk Hogan, and this is right before WrestleMania 1, where it was like they were testing the wrestlers gangsters, like, it's a fake thing. Hulk Hogan getting in trouble for choking out a talk show host who is Munch in Law and Order, who ended up suing the company. The infamous slap from Schultz.
Yeah.
who would proudly, they were like, Vince, supposedly says, I wish somebody would deal with him. And Schultz was like, I will, and slapped the shit out of that poor reporter twice. But those are the lengths that you had to go to protect the business.
Yeah.
And how did you feel about how Vince sort of touched on that at that time in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s?
That's that mad genius shit. Because here's the thing. He doesn't have to say anything. He knew what he was dealing with. He knew the guys he was hiring. He knew if he said, I wish somebody would do such and such, that's the equivalent of saying, go do it.
Right.
and it's also, you think about it, not thinking about lawsuits, but you thinking, wait, if I'm the guy who does this, then I can get that main event spot. You know what I mean? Think about this. You were there, Hall of Fame, when the guys went in there and the guy tried to tackle Bret Hart, right? All of a sudden, the Revival was on it. Now everybody looking at the Revival, now you get points with the boys because you went out there, you protected
what you had to do for
a
us,
legend.
for the right.
And that's the way I feel that David Schultz was looking at it. Like, we see his dark side of the ring.
Right.
You know?
Everyone was proud of what he did at first. And then the lawsuits started coming down, and Vince is put in this position where if we want to build up wrestling to what it is now, we can't have this like this image anymore. You know, back in the territory days, that's some badass shit. Like, that puts us on the map. Like, we do anything to protect the, everything. But when you want to take things to the level that Vince does, you gotta, unfortunately, kind of change some things around. And even Hulk was like, he wasn't happy with what I did and choking him out and things like that. But it just shows you the time that it was and how fiercely protective Vince was. We know about his strict rules with certain words and, not calling it wrestling on air at first. And it's WWE and the branding of it all we see forming in these years, and the importance of growing the brand.
Yeah. And Richard Belzer, he can't be asking him, put one of them wrestling moves on me. Like
you just find out.
Right.
Find out. And that's exactly what these two guys, they went into this community and thought they was going to do something. And then no.
You're not standing on a football field and telling Lawrence Taylor to run through you and tackle you.
Right.
Don't do it to wrestlers. You're not standing under a goal and say, Shaq, dunk on me.
Exactly.
What's the next takeaway?
Finding and building stars. So him poaching other territories for the stars that built that first kind of rocket ship that the WWF became at the time. And Hulk Hogan was, of course, one of them. And his relationship with Hulk Hogan is another very pivotal one that directs the future of the business that we love, that is sports entertainment. And you almost, it sucks because it was very nostalgic to look back on what made Hulkamania at the time.
Yeah,
I will say. And the fact that it was also very magical to watch WrestleMania 3 again.
Yes.
Or just the whole match and the build of the spectacle of it all, and remembering how big Hulk Hogan felt at the time, of how much of a hero he felt, and Andre the Giant knowing this is his last hurrah and he's gonna make it huge. And I love hearing that Andre made everybody sweat.
Yeah,
because I like to believe that deep down inside he was just like, of course I'm gonna do this. Of course I'm going to let this move forward, and for Vince and for everyone, which was so cool to see. But also the other stars that made that era what it was.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the Pipers. You're talking about, Mr. T crossing over. I always associated Mr. T with wrestling, obviously, growing up in a wrestling, fan household. So seeing the stars and seeing Vince like, Poach, hey, well, I can bring you over here and make more money. Who wouldn't do it?
Right.
So, I mean, it just made so much sense at that time. I mean, even from let's even talk about financial standpoint. We live for the pop. You know, that's what they always talk about. So where are you going to get the biggest pop? Places where you can go into most places, more visibility from you, not just wrestling in this territory. If you don't have a family or you just love wrestling so much, I mean, we've seen it on Young Rock, you know, the ability to go from here, you know.
Yeah. And Vince was the forward thinker in all of that. And all of these decisions and assembling all these people together. And it really created this juggernaut of a business at that time. And if you were working for the WWF, you were making a lot of money and Vince was working you for that money. Our fifth biggest takeaway was just the culture at the time. A lot of the societal norms were different and what was kind of tolerated. A lot of pseudo racism, those nationalist storylines, the ones that like kind of built the buzz around the business was the sort of patriotic attitude towards what was going on in the war at the time. But a lot of these stereotypes were kind of problematic and definitely wouldn't be able to do it now.
Yeah. They had a team named the Oriental Express.
That's insane. And the music. When you think about it.
And then Akeem the African Dream, even though it was a white man, you know, it's like, really? So the culture was definitely different. Glad they got away from it. But, you know, I'm not one to sit back and say, no, how can I explain this? I understand that society can be certain ways. So that's what made it acceptable. Not saying it's right, but it's like, well, I mean, everybody else was doing that on whether it was television. You know, we watch a lot of Dark Side of the 90s and stuff like that. So wrestling always reflected, and I think that's the biggest thing. Wrestling always reflected society.
It did at the time, and that's what people were emotionally invested in as a country, and that's how you connect people to what's going on in the wrestling ring. So Vince capitalized on that emotion that Americans had at the time. And this just goes back to what Vince has said about this. His response to some of these problematic storylines was, it was the time, it felt right. I had the right people to do it, and it was well executed, and the people loved it. And that is his attitude about certain things in life. That was the time. Even Triple H and Steph kind of defend a lot of the problematic storylines on screen with that was the time. You know, we wouldn't do it now, of course, but that was the time. So all in all, I think this episode builds the foundation of Vince McMahon's psyche, which is still to this day, like even just watching all 6 episodes is still very blurred, still very like you're not 100% sure who the fuck Vince McMahon is. But we get the foundation of his purpose, his drive, his love for it, and how relentless he is going to be to succeed in this business.
Yeah, we do. And that's why I can't wait till we jump into episode 2.
Yes.
Because things are heating up.
They are heating up. And we want to know what you all thought of episode 1. Did it do a good job of introducing Mr. McMahon? Do we feel like we know who he is? Learning about how he grew up in his childhood and his start in the business? Let us know, and make sure you tune into all 6 parts of our recap of the Mr. McMahon doc.